Hey everyone! Today we're going to cover what's new in vray 6 for Maya. We will look at new features like the Finite Dome, Procedural Clouds, vray Enmesh, and much more. I've set up timestamps so you can jump to any of the new features in this video. Now before we jump into the new features, I'm proud to announce I have an official sponsor for this video, and it's none other than Chaos, the makers of vray. I've been using vray for over a decade, and it is my most recommended offline render engine, both from a professional and personal standpoint. If you haven't tried vray, now's the time to do it. Chaos recently released vray 6 for Maya, which gives you total creative freedom. It includes powerful new tools allowing you to create anything imaginable without having to constantly switch between applications. You can learn more about what's new in vray for Maya and get a free 30-day trial at the link in the video description. So with that, let's get right into it. Alright, so here we are in Maya, and the first new feature we'll be looking at is the Finite Dome Light mode. So I'll start by creating the dome light right from the vray tab or the vray shelf right here. So if I create the new tab, you'll see that we have our usual dome light, and if I hit Ctrl-A for the attribute editor, you can see we have a new option here called Finite Dome. Now, what this allows us to do is fix the size of the HDRI environment in the scene with the new options within the dome light. This will allow for scaling of the dome light to match image-based lighting to models. The new Finite Dome Light options provide new ground projection capabilities and blending around corners. So we're going to take a look at that. So we first need an HDRI, and I have a couple already downloaded, and as usual, we can take a look and see that I pulled them from Polyhaven, which is a free resource. So make sure to support them if you're using this for professional personal work. So I have a couple of HDRIs, so we can see this in a couple of examples. So with this dome light created, I enable use dome text, go to dome texture here on the right, and we're going to plug in one of those HDRIs. The first one that I'm going to start with is that derelict highway. So I'm going to now select file, and then under image name, I'll add the new texture here. So I just went and jumped to the correct project, and you can see I have derelict highway here. Now if I hit open and plug that in, and let that load. There we go. It's loaded. Now we can see that we have our usual 360-degree spherical HDRI. And if I simply render with IPR, we'll see what we're looking at now. And as usual, we see our vehicle just kind of floating within this 360-degree spherical image. But if we go over to our settings within our dome light and enable the Finite Dome, we'll see what that'll do for us. Now I am in IPR mode, so this will update correctly, and we can see it shrinks down here to this kind of half hemisphere, half spherical dome. And so what we want to do now is increase the radius, so this really starts to push out the spherical dome, and I'm really going to crank this up quite a bit. So we can really get this out there and set something like 500 just to get it larger than the vehicle. And since this is such a large environment, I'm really going to crank this out. So I'm going to go from 500 to about 5,000. Now remember, this is default units. So there we go. Now we can see what we start to have. And what I can do is position our camera here a bit. And what I'll also do is select our render cam demo here. And I have my focal length set to about 50. And you can see that the vehicle is starting to look like it's actually projecting and being placed on this ground, which is really nice. Now, the next thing that I need to do is increase the projection height here. So if I go to projection height, I ended up using a value of about 135. So you can see how that, if I kind of scroll back and forth, you can see what this is starting to do and really adjusting the height of this projection here. So I ended up using 135, and we have ground blend here. Now, based on what we have here, we can add and rotate the HDRI. So if I head over to the HDRI and the dome light, as usual, you can rotate it a bit. So maybe we position our camera here. So I'll actually do it like this. There. So I just did some UI readjusting. And what I want to do is move our camera here, where it's kind of looking at the vehicle from this 3/4 angle, and we've rotated our HDRI where we have kind of the road adjusting like so. And I can show the frames here with this option of the gate mask, and we get something like this. Now, of course, it doesn't look like it's quite integrated yet. So what we can do is just create a simple plane, and I will scale up the plane here. And there's this nice option now called Shadow Catcher. So you can simply select your plane and just left click to add a shadow catcher, and bam, there you go. So very, very easy to add this functionality. And you can see it really looks like it's part of the scene here. And you can just make adjustments as needed. And I have a couple other examples where, we have this nice road here. And if I go to my light lister, you can see a couple of other examples. So I'll grab my light lister and we can grab road here and switch our camera over to road, and I'll stop IPR and restart this real quick. And you can see now this is a nicer, more heroic angle using the spherical HDRI here. And it's nice because we don't need a perfectly matched backplate. And there's another example here where I have the garage, so I'll switch to that. And there we go. So I've switched to the garage version here, and you can see it looks really, really nice and looks like it's really part of this image. And if you throw a little bit of depth of field on this, it'll really kind of settle everything here nice and together like. So I can select the garage, and you can see that it has quite a different settings here, and it's still using the shadow catcher. So all in all, this is a fantastic new feature and allows for really, really quick visualization. So we'll now move on to the next new feature. So the next new feature we'll be looking at is Enmesh. Now, Enmesh is a tool that uses geometry as a texture to coat objects. It can tile and repeat geometry infinitely and bend over desired surfaces. Now, Enmesh can be used to create patterned fabrics, woven and knitted materials, as well as chainmail, and it can be used to scattered grass, pebbles, patches, stones, tiles, and more. So I have this example here of this really cool scene that I got from Chaos, and what we can do is take a look at adding a nice Enmesh feature right here at the top of this platform here. And I have this fence geometry. Now what's important here, you can see I have it curving around like so. And what's important is making sure that your objects have clean UVs. Now, this is a nice and simple object, so I have this nice camera-based projection that I unfolded. So the UVs are all set to go. So this object needs UVs. And with this object set, I have these Enmesh pieces here that I can use as an example. So I have just your standard nice fence piece pattern, and then I have this more, organic looking diamond pattern. Okay, if I grab the Enmesh fence object first, then I grab the fence geometry, I can start creating Enmesh. So with these two selected, I will hit Enmesh here at the top, which will create the vray Enmesh. And I'm going to delete actually the first one so that doesn't get in the way. And then I'm going to do an IPR render. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that our Enmesh does not work with vray GPU, so I have to rely on my old good Intel 5820K CPU. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick on IPR. And there we go. We can see that we have our red metal X fence pattern kind of going here. And what I want to do now is select my vray Enmesh, and I can start the tiling process. So if I want to bump this up quite a bit and increase this 15 by 15, you can start to see you get this really cool pattern. Now what makes this better than a standard 2D tiling is, I'm going to get in pretty close here, is you can get some nice thickness here, and it conforms really well to the surface of your objects. I'll also just render regions, so we have kind of a smaller area to work with where I can see the pattern going. So I'll do that. Okay, there we go. So it's now updating, and I can again increase this quite a bit where, I can increase the tiling, maybe 30 by 30 or even 50 by 50. and get some nice different patterns here. And then if I wanted to increase the thickness of this, and this is where the Enmesh comes in pretty nice, is I can play with this height percent here, and watch if I set this to something large like 500, right? This is now a fully 3D object here showing up at render time. You will notice that it does not show up at all in the viewport, and there's no way to really convert it, so it's just a render time feature. So we can see things really start to look nice, and you can also change what's called the crop box. So if I head over to the Enmesh fence pattern, and you can see this crop box here, by changing this crop box, it will also adjust how this is being tiled. So if I, let's say, bring it in a little bit tighter, it starts to overlap a lot more. You can also do this with really any objects. So I will now try to do this with another pattern, which I'll use this diamond pattern. So again, I'll select the Enmesh diamond pattern, then select my fence geometry, and then again apply Enmesh. And then I will kick on IPR. And there it goes. And of course I can bump up the tiling a bit, so we get 25 by 25, so you have these cool patterns. And I can zoom in a bit to kind of see what's going on. And what I can do is select this Enmesh pattern and also edit this, since all of the history is connected and live. So I can move that, and you can start to see it update in the IPR. So I can't use my good old 390 here, or 3090 RTX, so I'll have to just stick with my Intel CPU. But it works really well even on this complex scene here. Now I do need to select my camera, and I will turn off the depth of field so I can actually see what's going on. So there's no blur there. There we go. And if I like what I see, I can zoom out a little bit, and I can turn off render region, and there you go. And I'm just applying the material for this on the plane object. So I'm just using a kind of red anodized metal. So again, this is a really, really nice feature just to add nice three-dimensional features and details and kind of take it up another level from 2D textures. So that about wraps this feature up, so we'll go ahead and jump to the next one. Alright, so the next feature we're going to be looking at is Procedural Clouds. The V-Ray Sun and Sky system now comes with Procedural Clouds, and you can even project shadows onto the ground. You can create really any custom procedural cloudy environment, and even do time lapses with a few simple animation clicks. So you can see here we have this cute little Volkswagen Beetle on the beach. And if I do a quick render here, we'll see what we have. So here's what we got. We have just the standard V-Ray Sun and Sky with the clear blue sky. Now there is no textured background or anything showing up here. The only thing in the background is just this far off terrain here. So what we can do now is select the V-Ray Sun, hit Control A to go into our attribute editor, and you'll see this new option called Clouds. So if I expand this, I can simply hit Clouds on. And there you go. Just right away, you get this nice, beautiful looking procedural cloud system. And you can lower the density, so maybe you just have a few clouds in the background. You can increase the density quite a bit, and you can really start to see that you get this nice overcast here, almost looking like a thunderstorm type of environment. So if I set this back to the default 0.5 intensity, and you can also add or remove this cirrus amount. I really, really like cirrus, so it kind of adds that nice detail here in between all of the clouds. And as you really increase that, you can start to see it starts to add in this nice cirrus cloud effect here in between the larger cloud puffs here. Then You can change the variety if you wanted to increase the variety of the shapes and size. So now you have larger and smaller, and it just looks fantastic. And if you wanted to bring these higher or lower, you certainly can. So I can increase the height so it starts to really push these clouds high up into the sky, or really, into the atmosphere, or I can bring them down quite a bit where these clouds really start to lower so it looks like the altitude is changing. So there's a lot of control here, and it is so exciting to finally have this feature with V-Ray. I love the good old HDRIs, but sometimes you just want something very specific and you're just limited to what's out there in the real world. Now with the procedural clouds, you can create really any type of cloudy system. And if you enable ground shadows and increase the density, you'll start to see that, again, it really starts to project those shadows down onto the ground. So another long-awaited feature that is finally here, and it just works so great. So that is, at a high level, the procedural clouds within V-Ray. So I will be using this scene for the remainder of the new features, and the next feature I'll be looking at is thin film. So if I grab this, what thin film will allow us to do is add this nice top layer, this sheen layer on our glass. So if I grab the glass material, head over to our attribute editor and go down in our settings, you'll see that if I scroll down to reflection, and then within reflection, you'll see that there is thin film. So we have thin film here, and what you can do is enable thin film option, and you can start to see the effect. And what this is going to do is create a nice effect, and you can use this more for soap bubbles, oil spills, oxidized metal, and just do whatever you want to do and have this nice control. So I'll show you what we can do, right? If I increase the max settings here, and I can go to the min settings and increase that as well, you can really start to see we get this bubble-like sheen here where you start to get the colors showing up really nicely. So it adds this nice layer here, and you can even independently increase the IOR here to give this a more intense reflection. So kind of let that run, and I'll show you kind of a before and after with and without thin film here. And there we go. Here's just a nice sample of the thin film here being applied to the glass, and you can see what it looks like without it. So a nice subtle effect here, but it gives you that nice thin layer to have more control over, and really works well for bubbles. So that wraps it up. So we'll take a look at the next feature. So the next new feature we'll be looking at is composition guides in the V-Ray frame buffer. You can add composition guides and overlay it right in the V-Ray frame buffer. For example, if I head over here to the layers in the V-Ray frame buffer and go to the bottom, you can see we have proportion guide. Now, if you've watched any of my tutorials in the past, you'll notice that I use the field chart right here. So this is just a kind of a broad grid-like chart here that you can use for framing. But what's nice is you can combine both the field chart and proportion guide here to create some really nice, interesting shots, right? So if I kind of zoom in and use my standard rule of thirds, I can focus in on maybe the front 3/4 of the vehicle and fade off into the rear. So you have a shot there, and you're doing that all within, within the IPR, within using V-Ray GPU. So it's a really nice tool to have. You of course have different types of proportion guides. So if we don't want to use rule of thirds, you can use diagonal. You can also use golden ratio, center cross, and even use a custom grid. And they all come with their own respective colors and options and width and whatnot. So nice absolute control. So if I even wanted to, increase this a bit, I certainly can. So very nice tools, and allows for more artistic control as you're rendering with Maya and V-Ray. So that wraps it up, and we'll take a look at the next final new feature. Now the last new feature I'll be covering within this video is the profiler, the V-Ray profiler. So a lot of times especially when working with people that are trying to figure out why their renders are taking so long, the vray profiler is a fantastic tool to help kind of dissect and really find what's bottlenecking and taking up the most time. So the way we access this is, well, for one, I need to turn off vray IPR. And I need to switch from vray GPU to just standard vray. So this does not work for vray GPU and only works for CPU rendering. Then what you need to do is head over to the settings here, and you want to go down to System, then vray Profiler. And you want to turn the mode from off, which is the default, and turn it on. And then you can save it as whatever you want, and it saves it as a JSON file. So I have it already saving and outputting to a folder that I just named Profiler in my project, Maya project, and I'll call this vray Profiler 3 since this will be the third one. And then from here, I'll go ahead and just kick off a render. Now, vray and Chaos do disclaimer this and say that it will impact your render times by a few percentage. I think they said about 4. This is standard when it comes to profiling tools. I do a lot of profiling when it comes to Unreal Engine and Unity, and it's just a process that runs in the background while you're running your renders, right? So let this go here for a few passes, and I'll let this go for a few more seconds. All right, great. And then I'll hit stop. Then what I want to do is open up Chrome and paste this URL here, which is Chrome //tracing. Now this is just a web mode to view JSON files, and then I will load the JSON file that I output. So I'll just hit load right here, find vray Profiler 3, which I just output right now, hit open, and there you go. And what this is going to do is just give you a lot of information and let you know really what's taking the longest amount of time here. We can see that the sand material is taking about 17% worth of the effort. We have chrome here, and then the palm leaf fronts, those seem to be taking up the most, which makes sense when you really think about it, because they are these detailed opacity cutout leaves, and there is a lot of aliasing here, right? And so there has to be a lot of sampling that happens. So that's where vray is spending the most amount of effort. You can continue to go deeper into the profiler here. So let me pull that back up, and you can continue to drill down and really see where it's spending the most amount of time here. So I'll leave that as is, and then look at kind of the file size stats, and you can really see where it's spending most of the effort here. So a fantastic tool. I won't be going into profiling in detail, but it is really, really nice to finally have this to be able to really dig down element by element, object by object, and just see where the biggest impact is happening. So definitely a fantastic tool. So that wraps up all the features that I'll be covering. You'll see that if you head over to what's new in vray 6 on vray for Maya's documentation page, you'll find all similar features here being explained. And there's also other features I didn't cover, but they're worth noting, which is the portable installation, vray decals with displacement, Chaos Cloud collaboration, and this, which is a really nice step forward in realism, which is energy preservation. So you can make sure to kind of tick that on in your settings, which this is on by default now. So unless you turn it off, you will have this feature on by default. And of course, composition guides, and then a lot of other new features. So I'll be sure to link this. And if you found this helpful, let me know down below. And if you'd like me to cover anything new that's out there, for whether it's Maya, vray, or any other tutorials, new features, let me know down in the comments, and I'll be sure to make a video. So if you found this helpful, as always, like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see everyone around. Take care.